drop in the chat where you're, tuning in, and we can see where everyone's at. Aspen is always holding down LA. I love it. Charvon in Philly, D in LA. Tampa is always in the building as well. Houston, Memphis, Tennessee. I love it. I love it. Atlanta, Kentucky. Yes.
Wow, all over.
Jersey. I love it. New York, Virginia. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to give it a little bit of time before we get started. Another person from Tampa. That's amazing. Love it. Nolans. I love it. One of my favorite places. Yes.
Yeah.
Can't wait till we
I've been once. I've only visited once, but I fell in love.
I fell in love, especially with the food and the accent. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think maybe we should get started then, Kesha. How are you feeling?
Sounds good to me. Do it.
For those who don't know, Kesha is this incredible wedding photographer and portrait photographer. She has done it all. Some of my favorite work actually is what you've been posting with Lovey. It's so nice to see like that ongoing like work with your client Lovey. And she's also a Sony Alpha ambassador. We've had, I think, 2 conversations now within the Black women photographers community. One was with you and your fellow Black women camera ambassadors back in last year. I want to say December or November. I don't know. My sense of time is a blur. And then also on Clubhouse, we've also been having conversations. And I'm so excited for you to tell us all about lighting, because you are such an expert at it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me back. I love this topic. It's funny you say I'm an expert. I feel like I am a forever student of light, but I'm happy to share some, my approach and thought process and things that I've learned along the way. So yeah.
Amazing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna play this lesson from Kesha, and then afterwards we're gonna have the discussion in Q&A. So I'm gonna open it up right quick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. That was a quick peek behind the lens. I am so thrilled to be here with you today. Thank you, ProPhoto, for having me. I am excited to share all about working with one light. Before we jump in, a quick introduction. I am a wedding event and portrait photographer based in New York. We are a husband and wife run business, and we work weddings throughout the New York City tri-state area, and also through nationwide and internationally. We do a fair amount of destination weddings. We do people work in general. So I do events, I do portraiture. We have a team of 3 associates, and together we photograph between 60 and 70 weddings annually. So busy group. I'm also a recently named Sony Artisan of Imagery. Very, very excited and proud and thrilled for that accomplishment, and looking forward to where this new chapter takes me. I am a lawyer, or a recovering lawyer. So no longer practicing full time, but I am a lawyer admitted to practice in New York City. I'm also a mom of 3 incredible boys, including a set of twins. So I'm a mom of multiples. As I mentioned, I run the business with my husband, so I am a wife and a wearer of many hats, both literally and figuratively. I am a multitasking, busy mompreneur, but I also am obsessed with hats. If you know me, you know that you'll almost always find me wearing one. So that is a quick and brief introduction to who I am and what we do. So I chose this topic, one light, high impact, because the one light setup is truly a staple in my work. As a photographer that works for the most part on location, the one light setup has truly been a game changer for me. And I will share some of the reasons why in this presentation. But first, let's talk about what you need. So much of what I'm going to share with you today, here's a short list of what you would need in order to pull off something similar to execute this. So the topic is one light, so you need just one light. And when we're talking about working on location, that one light is usually a flash or a medium strobe. Compatible trigger, there are several different types of triggers, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm referring to a radio trigger. Specifically, a transceiver is what I use. Light stand, a light stand, if you're working solo, this is pretty useful to have on hand. If you're anything like me, I can find pretty creative places to tuck and prop my light. Not recommended. Much safer for your light if you use a light stand. An assistant and light shaping tools. Now I have asterisks next to these two because we're talking about what you need. And in the instance of an assistant, this is, although it's not a need, it is a highly recommended, strongly urged addition to your work mode, your working setup. Light shaping tools, I put an asterisk next to this because a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I actually did it bare face light. But light shaping tools are absolutely an important addition to your kit. I use them, I have them, and you know, they're important because they allow you to control your light, shape your light, and it opens up a ton of creative options for you when you use them. So now that we talked about what you need, I'll talk about quickly what I use. So when I'm working on the fly, on location, I am typically using these items here. This is kind of the bare minimum of what I'll usually have on hand. So for my flash, I'll have an A1, which I use on or off camera, a B10, and my trigger, the ProPhoto Air Remote. Some of the light shaping tools and accessories that I recommend, a collapsible reflector. It's a great way to create a 2 light setup with 1 light.
shoot through umbrella for soft spread of the light, XL umbrella, and the diffuser, looks like a sock. I'm obsessed with this combination. I love it. Deep umbrella, it could be white, it could be silver. Soft boxes, grids, and gels, both corrective and creative gels, are great to add to your kit, and a backpack to carry it all. And on that point, Profoto is actually offering a promotion right now. And I have this backpack and it is absolutely incredible. It has so many cubbies and nooks and spaces for everything. And it's great for when you're working on the go. Profoto has a promotion right now where if you make a purchase in excess of $1,000, this backpack is free. So it's a great time to take advantage of this campaign. And let's jump in. So the assistant, as I mentioned, I'm going to start by talking about the assistant and the significance and importance of working with one. The assistant is truly a game changer for your work when you're working out on location, because when you think about it, if you're relying on a light stand, for example, if you're outdoors, you're at the mercy of the elements. Wind can knock your light stand over. Working with a human being, as opposed to propping your light somewhere or using stands, allows you to have your light stand anywhere your heart desires. And so this is why I almost always have an assistant with me. I do work solo. As I mentioned, I can be pretty creative about where I set my light in order to light my photos. But I almost always work with an assistant. And in this picture, you'll see a little backstory on this. We were out on location, and this was a good far walk from the car, and we left. Everyone thought the other one brought the light stand. No one brought it, the monopod actually. And so here we have Nadia, who was helping me out, trying to get on her very tippiest toes to get the light in the exact right place. And we worked it out. We got that light and we were able to pull this wonderful, beautiful photo off for our client. So let's talk about the goal. My goal when it comes to lighting is for the light to enhance, for the light to be subtle, and for it to not overpower and take center stage. I don't want you to look at my work and say, whoa, light. Unless you're saying, whoa, what beautiful light. What I mean is I really want the vision to come through and for the light as be a tool to pull that vision together. And so why one light? Simply put, working with one light allows me to be compact, lightweight, movable. As you can see, we can move about without the complexity of lots of equipment, and multi-light setups do require more equipment and a lot more thought process. And working with one light, if you're working on the fly, is just the absolute perfect setup for being able to tuck yourself in tight spaces. And it just learning how to use one light to creatively is truly a way to be able to pull off these impactful images and maintain simplicity in your process. Positioning and placement. So a lot of my approach has to do with the vision and the concept and idea. So it's very important to learn the most common used setups for light positioning. But once you have that down and once you learn those things, my general thought process about light is, how do I want the end result to look? How do I want this vision to come together? And when you're working with one light and you can have your light positioned and placed anywhere your heart desires in the scene, that is always my first question. What's the concept? So for this image, for example, during the session, these ladies are, what's the best way to describe what they do? They are like life coaches. They do readings. And so my thought process after working with them and finding out more about what they envisioned for, we were doing this project for their website. My thought process in this one was like, I wanted to create this thing where she was reaching up to a light. And so I positioned a light to illuminate her hand. And I positioned the light, had the person helping me position the light, not only to illuminate her hand, but have a kiss of that light fall on her face. And that was the thought process and the reason why the light was positioned the way it was, because I wanted her to appear as if she was reaching for the heavens. And this is the resulting photo. When you take your light off camera, even the most simplistic approach to lighting, such as bounce flash, when you are in a setting like this, where it's an all white space, it's like a slow pitch for a photographer, right? You're in an all white space, white walls, the ceilings aren't too high, right? Perfect for bounce flash photography. But taking your light off camera and being able to have it anywhere you'd like in the space makes the light more intentional and focused. And so in this instance, I had the light positioned off camera on a light stand closer to the centerpiece that I was photographing. My approach and thought process with lighting is always about direction of light. Where do I want the light coming from? How soft, how hard, how powerful do I need it to be? How subtle do I need it to be to execute the end resulting photo that I'd like? So here is the first photo I'd like to share with you, showing the lighting setup. For this, we had two of the bridesmaids in the foreground. And what I really wanted to do, my thought process about light placement here was I wanted to draw the eye and call attention to the bride at the far end of the hallway. And this is definitely a non-traditional setup, a non-traditional bride and bridesmaids pose. So I had two bridesmaids in the foreground using only the light that was in the space, the ambient light in the space. And on the far end of the hallway, I had positioned the bride very close to the end of the hallway, to the frame of the wall. And I had a light on a 45-degree angle coming in from the side. And similar setup, I'll show you in the next slide, but I positioned it this way so that I could illuminate the bride and her bridesmaids. And because the floor was reflective, we also, that light also helped that reflection, brought it up really nicely. Similar concept to the bride and bridesmaids photo, only I didn't position it on a 45-degree angle. And as you can see, the reflection on the floor is still there. It's not as illuminated as it was in the previous shot. But I positioned the light slightly different, and I will talk about split lighting in just a moment, but I positioned it for split lighting on the groom. I wanted dramatic hard shadow to fall on him. And so the light is positioned directly to the side of his body. And so you see that hard line shadow going down the middle of his face. The one light setup for me will almost always have light positioned off to the side. So off to the right, off to the left, slightly off to the side, or extremely to the side. And this is because I want the lighting to have high contrast, to have depth. And when you face your light straight on to your subject, it tends to be a flatter lighting. You'll also find that I place my light above head height often when I'm working with one light, tilted down 45 degrees, 30 degrees. And I use this positioning to push shadows down in the resulting photo. So here we have another example of working with one light. This not pictured in the diagram, was a XL umbrella with the diffuser. And this is not something that I would typically use while working outside, because it's a little tricky to work with a very, very large umbrella outdoor unless you have weights and things to keep it safe and keep it in place. But here was an opportunity. We were working at a venue in Brooklyn that had this vault. And so we were in a controlled setting. So I do this on the wedding day. I will break out the XL umbrella for groups. And in this instance, we were doing a bridal shoot. And I positioned the light high, coming in from the side of our model. And it was fairly close. So brought the light source pretty close because I wanted the light to hit her in a very soft spread. So the closer I brought the light to my model, the softer the light. I love the results of this setup because it's a very soft and matte look. And the shadows fall off really feathered and nicely. Here's another one light technique. And I'm always thinking about where I want my light to be, because one light, and especially when you're movable and you have your assistant, your light can be anywhere, right? So in this particular instance, I had the groomsmen I positioned the groom facing camera. So I was dead center. I positioned the groomsmen, I had them line up facing each other, half of the groomsmen on the right, half of the groomsmen on the left. I lined them up and I directed them to walk towards each other, cross each other's path. I positioned the light between the groomsmen and the groom, and it was positioned on a 45-degree angle so that I could illuminate the groom. And you'll see that the groomsmen, they fall into a silhouette as they are walking past the groom, and the groom is lit from the side. Again, coming in from the side with my light and positioned in such a way as to illuminate the bride's, the dress, the details of the bride's dress, and illuminate the groom. And the beauty of working with an assistant, if you look at this image, you actually can see the silhouette of the person who was helping me to pull this shot off. For this setup, we had the assistant stand on the stairwell, position the light above what would be head height, 45 degrees. We had the model who was at enter from the top of the escalator, and the assistant was positioned so that as she crossed his path, the light would hit her exactly just right. And so we had a moving subject with one light, and I removed the light and the light and monopod in post, and we were able to get this image. Another example of my thought process and approach to lighting is always one light. How do I want the end result to look? And so another looking up to the heavens, joyful, gleeful concept came together by positioning the light above head height, directly in front of our subject. And I was slightly off to the right of our subject so that I could capture this look of her looking up to the light. And this is the end result. Now this one, in terms of modifiers, we were using the small softbox, the small OCF softbox. Light positioning is also impacted by the position of your subjects. And so that's another thing, and we'll talk about that more in a moment, that you can play around with, is the positioning of your subject. The light will be stationary in one place, but affect them differently depending on how they're standing and the way they are positioned in relation to the light. So let's talk about backlight, which is probably one of my favorites, especially when it comes to working with one light. If you want to create something wow factor that will impress your client, if you're looking to push yourself creatively, a great technique to play around is positioning your light, to position your light behind your subject. Here's an example of thought process first. I saw the gates. We were shooting at dusk, and I really wanted to pull together a resulting image that looked heavenly. And so I positioned the light directly behind the couple, shoulder height of the groom, since he was the tallest person. And that light spread really nicely through the gate, casting the shadows of the gate into the ground. And it created this heavenly looking and resulting image. This maternity silhouette was captured using an XL umbrella with a diffuser. I brought this out, as I mentioned, that I don't typically use it on location, but we were doing this in the couple's home. So for this shot, I set up the medium strobe with the XL umbrella and diffuser, and I positioned it behind my subject, but pointing towards the backdrop. My hope in this positioning was to get that light to bounce back onto the mom-to-be, and I positioned it behind her, but not direct, not fully behind her. So a little bit of that light was peeping out behind her to the front. And this was the result of that positioning for the light. When you're working with backlighting, you can position it to face your subject, or you can position it pointing at the wall. And this is a great way to positioning it at the background or at the wall, allows you to create really cool silhouettes and interesting light patterns. Rim light. I use rim light often, and I use it when I am doing a 2-light setup. So this was created with 1 light positioned behind the bride, about 3 to 4 feet behind the bride, because I wanted the light to spread across the entire group and illuminate the backdrop. And I positioned it at shoulder height of the bride. She was in the center, and she is the tallest, or second tallest. And I positioned that way because I wanted to illuminate her veil. I wanted to carve out our subjects from the background. And so that's what rim does. Positioning it in that way allows you to get that little etching of light around your subject. Another example of rim light, I typically would position it behind the groom shoulder height, but in this instance, I positioned it behind our bride. And I did this because I wanted to illuminate her veil. I wanted that light to filter through her veil and filter through her gown. And so in this instance, the light was also, you'll see that it is also carving out those little cacti, I don't know what they are, but you can see the light is spreading nicely across the environment behind them and carving them out from the backdrop. Ice cream bribes were definitely involved in the making of this behind the scenes clip. These are my sons. And we took this film so that you can get an idea of what it might look like in the field to create rim light, where I might position, how far back I might position the light. And, you know, flash power certainly depends on the setting that you're working in and the resulting image. So I placed the light a few feet behind my sons, placed it at the shoulder height of my tallest and eldest son, and this is the resulting photo. Lighting particles. So if you want to create something that really impresses your client, this is a great technique. So when I talk about lighting particles in the air, I mean smoke, mist. You can bring your own. You have aerosol in a can. You can bring atmosphere. But with a wedding, for example, and if there's a professional makeup artist on deck, there will almost always be this moment when you have a professional makeup artist. Also, a little cheat, because I had a secondary light source here. So the bride is lit by the makeup artist's ring light. And a lot of makeup artists on the wedding day will bring some form of lighting, continuous lighting, so that they can see their work area and do the makeup application. And that light will almost always be positioned to illuminate the face. And so since I knew that this moment would happen, that there would be either makeup finishing spray or hair finishing spray, I positioned my light to create a rim around the bride's profile. And so that light was set up and ready. I lucked out because I had the makeup artist light in place. And I see some raised hands coming through. I do see you. I'm gonna answer questions at the end, so please do continue. If there are any questions for me, I will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, smoke, you may find opportunity to find environmental fog. If you're ever out and there's bad weather, it's not necessary, that's actually an opportunity, and you can help your clients to understand rain, snow, foggy days. You don't need to have sunlight to have beautiful photos. You can really get wow factor photos. In fact, you really luck out if you get a foggy day, but you can bring your own fog, and that in the form of color bombs and smoke bombs. This was what I used to get this image. I brought a smoke bomb and we backlit the couple. The groom having an end of night, that's a wrap, cigar, a solo groom moment. I positioned the light here so that it would fall. It came in from the side. I positioned it, I worked with one light. I wanted to both illuminate the groom and backlight the smoke in the air. So it was positioned to the side of the groom. You can see that most of the light is falling on the side of his face that's away from camera. And it's still filtering in the smoke. So we have illumination on his face and hand and cigar, and it creates mood and contrast and depth. Split light. Split lighting is just wonderful if you want to create drama and high impact imagery. To give you an idea of where your light source would be for a hardline split light setup, it's coming in directly from the side of the subject. This is a B10 with the small octa, off-camera OCF octa. And I position it this way because we'll get one half of our subject illuminated and the other half of our subject falls into this hard defined shadow. And I use this in portrait work. I use this in creative personal shoots, but I also use it at weddings. And although this is atypical for a wedding, it's certainly not a timeless look, timeless lighting setup to use for a wedding. I think it comes in really handy in a number of ways, and I'll explain why. To give you an idea of where you would be, this is kind of around your light source would be directly to the side of your subject. You do not have to be super close to your subject, depending on the light shaping tools that you're using, and how much working space you have to work with. The general gist, the point of the split lighting setup is that you're coming in directly from the side to create this dramatic shadow. So one light, two looks. And so this is one of the things that I like to play around with split lighting. Here's an example of using one light and get two different lighting patterns on your subject. In this instance, I side lit, I had the groom positioned facing camera, and I had the bride positioned with her back to the groom, with her upper body, turned in towards the light. So the light was positioned to directly side light the groom. I had it up slightly above the height of the bride, and I positioned it so that it would side light the groom, but because of the bride's shift in position, the light illuminated her face fully, and the groom fell into split lighting. So we have that hard line shadow going directly across one half of his body. This is a dramatic portrait. It is non-traditional. We certainly do the clean and classic portraits for our couples, but this is something that we would also do to create something wow factor. And to give you an example of how you can play around with the one light, two looks using split lighting in particular, this is kind of where you would be. You can do it directly. If you're trying to illuminate one subject, then you'll want the light to come in from above. It does not have to be this high, but this is the result. So using positioning of your subject while leaving your light placed in one particular spot, setting it up so that you can get two different looks in one shot is another great technique to add to your repertoire. Another example of using one light to create two looks. Now, this is me experimenting. If you know anything about me, my philosophy is always to push and try and experiment, even if it might not work out. And this is certainly an example of me experimenting with light positioning, because the light pattern is coming in from underneath the groom's face. I positioned the light here in the hands. So this was an engagement session, actually, not bride and groom. An engagement session, and I wanted to get a cool silhouette. I wanted to create some drama. And so I positioned the light in the bride's hand. I posed her, bride-to-be, put the light in her hand. The light was pointing towards her back, but it was peeping out just a little bit towards the groom's face. And so playing around with positioning of my subject, I was able to both illuminate the groom's face in this kind of deep, mysterious kind of lighting, and get a cool silhouette of this bride-to-be, and in all her glorious hair, getting silhouetted from the backdrop, and also a little bit of rim coming in from where the light was placed in her hand. One light, two lighting looks. For this one, we were set, this is a separate room. I was across the hallway, and the bride and groom, I positioned the groom facing camera. I positioned the bride with her back to camera, but I directed her to turn her face up and towards the light. And where was the light? The light was handheld by an assistant. She was actually standing on a chair. We wanted the height on that light tilting down, and the result is that we illuminated the bride's face and shoulder, and there was a fall off into the shadow. And on the groom, we had not a hard split, but we had a little bit of a split lighting pattern. What I love about working with one light is that you can get different looks, and with flash in particular, you can get different looks working under the same lighting conditions at the same time of day. These two photos were taken moments apart from each other at the same location at the same time of day. On the left, we have a deep, high contrast, bold color. It almost looks like nighttime on the left. And on the right, we have something that looks daylit lit and glowing. And so using one flash opens up many, many creative options for you as a photographer to create different looks. Even if you are working, say, within an hour or a 30-minute session, you can create different looks using flash. Drag your shutter. So dragging your shutter is just a really great way to create something cool for your couples. You want to create something that will stop them in their tracks, drag your shutter. And this is pretty popular among wedding and event photographers, people who shoot weddings or life events like sweet 16s and bat mitzvahs. This is a technique that we love to use on the dance floor. Dragging our shutter on the dance floor, you get cool results because there are DJ lights, everyone's dancing, so there are moving people. And so this is a great opportunity to drag your shutter and create something cool. But I also use this technique for portraiture. And the ingredients are pretty straightforward. You need a slow shutter speed, or you're using long exposure. Movement, so this movement could be your subject moving, it could be objects in the environment moving, throw things across the frame, it could be cars moving, it could be people moving. So if you want to create something with a wedding party, you can have the bride and groom stand very, very still and have the wedding party move and drag your shutter. Or you can have your subject move and then stop to create ghosting, as I did in this example. You'll see there's a little bit of ghosting around the edge of this model because I had her move and then stop. Flash, you need the flash when you're using this because flash will freeze motion. And you'll want to put your flash into rear curtain sync. So normal mode is front curtain sync, where your flash fires at the start of your shot. In rear curtain sync, your camera records the movement, and at the end, your flash fires. And this is great if you want to freeze motion. Working with gels. Gels are a great way to open up creative possibilities, to create something different. If you're working with one light in particular, this technique, for example, I used a CTO gel, and the CTO gel is the one that looks orange. I used the CTO gel and set my white balance really cool. And so that throws the environment into a very cool toned blue. And when you do that and you work with the CTO gel, it preserves warm tones for your subject, warm tones on the skin. So even though my white balance is really cool, using the CTO gel keeps the couple, their skin warm. It's just a great, working with gels is just a great tool to get creative with colors and tones. Another example here, I had them holding a light, and that we used a very cool environment, and we were able to create this image. Gels are great for backlighting. There's a creative gel line where you can use gels to match the colors and tones of your environment, blues, pinks. Gels are just a great addition to add pop and wow factor to your work. I also love to work with gels. This was a quarter CTO gel. And I like to work with gels because they are great for achieving skin tones, the skin tones that look pleasing. This is not sunlight. Another thing that you can use gels for is faking sun. So using a CTO gel comes in handy if you're outdoors and working in really flat lighting conditions. I positioned the light here so that I could create the look of sunlight. And let's talk about finding a secondary light source. So when you're looking for a secondary light source, what should you be looking for? You should be looking for wherever you can find illumination in the environment. Windows, doorways, cubbies, and nooks, light fixtures, uplighting, reflective surfaces. Windows, for example, are a great source to find all different types of light to play with. Windows, depending on the time of day and the location that you're working in and how many windows are in the space, windows can be a source for soft light, diffuse light, hard light, cool patterns to play with. Windows cast patterns of objects. So windows are a great source to find secondary light. And you're looking for secondary light so that you can have something additional to use in terms of creating the look of a multi-light setup. Doorways, cubbies, and nooks in architectural structure, you'll usually find pockets of light in these places that are very pleasing to work with. Light fixtures, uplighting. Also, when you're speaking of events and weddings, there is often decor that will have light that you can work with, and reflective surfaces that will act like a reflector. Here's an example of environmental light that you can use. So on a building structure, the outside of the building has recessed lighting, it has lighting on it. There was a torch at the top of the building. And so I use that as a secondary light source. And this particular shot was lit with a B10 handheld with a softbox, small softbox. Here's another example of using environmental light. I positioned the light to create rim around our subject and filter through her skirt, but we also have the illumination of the lights on this building structure. here I was working under a tunnel and there is natural light coming in from the right. And so I positioned my strobe on the left of our subject so that I can create balance in the lighting for this particular shot. Searching for light in an environment is almost always, you're almost always going to find them in the form of fixtures and windows. In this particular shot, we had these warm amber tone light fixtures in the environment. And so I set my light up to the side of our subject. Basically, what we're looking for is anywhere in the environment that has illumination. This was a museum and this art installation was lit. And so it was the perfect spot to place our bride and groom for a photo op. As I mentioned, with weddings, there will almost always be available additional light to work with in the form of wedding decor. So in this case, there are tabletop candles. There was chandelier in the room. There are other light fixtures in the environment with amber tones, and they had uplighting. So all of this amber tone lighting was courtesy of the environment that we were working in. And I set my light right in between the table settings, closer to, you can actually see the stand in this shot. If you look really closely in between the bride, the groom and the table arrangement, you can see where the light is in relation to the couple. You can also find secondary light sources in the form of street lights. So walking down any given street, but also in little alleyways like this nook. And they add dimension and a secondary source for you to play with. So I'd like to leave you, before we wrap up and open up the session for questions, I would like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. And the first being, don't be afraid of missing the mark when you're working with lighting. Definitely get your foundational skills intact. And if you would like recommendations for online learning courses for learning the foundational skills with lighting, I'd be happy to share some. But don't be afraid once you have that foundation to experiment and push and try, because that's the difference between getting something nice that your clients will like and getting something that will completely blow them away. This is my first attempt into this point at pulling off a steel wool shot. And as you can see, I missed the mark a little bit. And at the bottom was my second attempt where I incorporated flash and this was the result of trial and error and a few fails. And my second point, before we open up the floor for questions, that I'd like to leave you with is always, always, always be a forever student of your craft. We should always be learning. So even if you've been doing this for years, even if you have a great skill set, seek out opportunities to learn. I crave information, I crave knowledge, and refresh what you know. Always seek out opportunities. One of the best things I did recently was revisit a foundational online course for foundation skills. And it was just a great reminder. And in this line, this is how you can find me. On my website, keshalambert.com/connect. I am findable by name across all platforms. So at Kesha Lambert on Instagram, Facebook is /Kesha Lambert. Twitter is the odd one out. I am findable on Twitter at Kesha Photo. And that is a wrap.
Wow. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. Students, how many have you, how are you doing? Now that was a beautiful presentation from Kesha. I see some questions already in the chat. Let's get right to it. I hope you all were taking notes. So I see Mumby. Oh, did you already answer this question? I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. Mumby and Kenya.
I didn't answer any questions.
Okay.
We can go through them and I'll chime in live.
Awesome.
I hope
So
everyone enjoyed and found some of that information useful and helpful.
I know I did. I
But
have some homework to do now. I feel like you gave me some homework. Okay, so I'm gonna just get to the questions real quick. So Mumbi in Kenya asks, how do you balance the natural light with flash, especially with blacklit image of the bride and the bridesmaids? The light on their faces was perfect.
Thank you. So my rule of thumb and when it comes to balancing ambient with flash is that I am usually, and with practice, you get to a point where you can kind of estimate what you want. But when starting out, I usually would take a test shot, and the test shot would be exposing for how I want the environment to look, but for adding in the light. So that's my first thing. Like, I expose it for how I want my ambient to look first, how I want the environment to look first, and then I add in the light. And then I'm adding in the light in terms of how much power or what kind of shaping tools, whether I'm using a grid, softbox, whatever that shaping tool is, I'm dialing in the power according to how much, whether I'm going for like a kiss or whether I'm going for really dramatic light, that kind of will determine the power. But the light is just in addition to, that's the thought process. It's just to illuminate my subject after I've already gotten the exposure that I want for the ambient.
Awesome, thank you. We're just gonna keep powering through. Stasi in New York asks, how powerful should a flash be when outdoors using it as a light trigger source? Example, it's flash settings. And she says that she uses an external flash.
Sure, so that will vary. If you're outside and it's an overcast day, or it varies according to time of day. So if it's overcast day, you can usually scale back on the power. If you depending on how bright your environment is, if it's dusk, if it's so depending on time of day and what the light is doing. If you're midday, full sun, then you're going to need more power than your flash. A medium strobe, like I would go for the B10 plus. It all depends on the environment. So if I'm shooting in full sun and I'm trying to kill shadows, then I need more power. If it's full sun, but I don't have my subject directly in the bright light, what I'll usually do is try to position my subject so that I can add in the light in relation to the brightness. So I'll look for cubbies and nooks to tuck people in and that kind of thing. But how much power you need depends on how you want the resulting photo to look and how much light you're trying to contend with. Like, are you trying to overpower light?
Incredible. Louisa in New York, I believe, also asked, do you have any tips for getting soft light / light that mimics daylight while using strobes in studio? I find it hard to imitate.
It can be tricky. So one thing I would say, when you think about, when you say daylight, I'm guessing you mean like that softer kind of the light you get on, are you talking like that flatter, more muted light you get on an overcast day, or the warm light, soft light you get from magic hour? I would say larger light source and being very conservative with the power. I think one of the things is that that's kind of the general approach. And then you'll wanna, if you're in studio, you'll want to make sure you're not getting pollution from other light in the environment. And so that is kind of infiltrating your light source. So those are kind of the general tips. How much power you need, positioning, how close your light source needs to be. But if you think about natural light indoor, it's usually coming in from like a large source. When you think about the softness of light, it's a large kind of even soft light. And so that's one of the reasons that I really love the XL umbrella, the white XL umbrella, because you get that large soft diffuse light.
Thank you. Ada in Tampa asks, can I use CTO gels for sport photos?
I would say, yeah. And I'm not, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a sports photographer. I don't know much about it. But if you're talking about, I would say CTL gels are useful wherever you're using, wherever you would use flash or strobes, any type of work where you're using flash or strobes, you can use it for all of the reasons that I listed, that I love CTO gels. So like you can use them for creative purposes, you can use them for corrective purposes, and absolutely. So if you are already using flash in your work, gels are a nice addition to your work with flash.
Thank you. Markel asks, how do you determine what modifier to bring with you, or do you typically shoot without modifiers?
I do it all. I'm a bit, I think Mad Hatter is a good way to describe me. I think my thought process is what I want out of the light. That will determine what light shaping tool I use. So I'm a fan of grids, because the light, the edge of the light is still soft, but it's more controlled. I'm a fan of umbrellas, because of how soft and even the spread is. It's wider, and less controlled, but it's very soft. So what modifier I use will be determined by how I want the light to fall off on my subject, how much control I want over it, how I want the light to be shaped. The different modifiers will impact your light in different ways. And it's one thing that I encourage people to do, like to kind of come into your style and know what modifiers you want to use, is if you have them, access to them, to test with them. And that kind of will tell you when you want to use what type of modifier. It might even narrow things down for you.
Thank you. And we're running out of time, so I'll take probably 2 or 3 more questions. So if you have any burning questions, drop it in the chat. Karen in Montreal asks, what is the biggest mistake people initially make with strobes?
The biggest mistake is using too much power. I think, a lot of times the biggest mistake is using too much power. And I think a lot of times another thing is that we feel like we have to, especially when it comes to one light, we have to do these exact rules, like these are the positionings that you should use. But creativity is like learning the rules and then bending them. So those would be the two things that I would say is, that's why I preach about, taking a less is more approach to flash power. And then also just being bold in your use of it, not being afraid to break some rules.
I love that. There's another question from Mambi in Nairobi asking, there was a photo of a bride and you mentioned that you brought the light closer to make it softer. It seems counterintuitive. Was it because it was a larger umbrella?
So yeah, well, no, the closer your light source, the softer the light. And it was really close and on an angle because I wanted the fall off. So I think I know what you're talking about, the one with the bank vault behind the bride, that model shoot. Yeah, the positioning was because I wanted it soft and I wanted a quicker fall off of the light.
Thank you. So I'm gonna drop in the chat the link to the Pro Photo flash I was used in the video. And don't worry, this won't be the last time you'll hear from Kesha and lighting. In a few days, I'll send this recording out to everyone who registered. So that way you can have it as a resource, and also Kesha's blog about lighting that goes into further detail about all the things that she mentioned in the presentation and more things that you should also know. If there are any last burning questions, no question is too silly, you all. Drop it in the chat. I want to make sure you have your questions answered while we still have Kesha live here. So any questions relating to lighting, no question is too small.
Definitely feel free to stay connected. You can reach out if you have any questions or if you're curious.
Amazing.
Anything we talked about today.
Yes, Wanja, I'm going to email this to you and everyone else, so that way you have it as a resource. And we'll take one last question from J. Pamela in Kansas City. She asked, do you test out your dramatic lighting setups with your sons before going out?
Sometimes they're not always willing. But in terms of testing before like I'm in front of a client, I will usually test. Sometimes I will test with clients and I bring them in on it. And I love to kind of like manage their expectations. Like after we've done what we needed to do, like, hey, I want to try something. Are you down? This might be great or it might not be. So that's another thing that I might do with a client. I usually have a really good rapport with them, so that like after we've done like the slow pitch kind of shots, we can play around. But if I am doing something that I'm not sure I can pull off, I'll usually try to test beforehand. But yeah, I also will do it on the job. I think it's all about kind of managing people's expectations for what you're doing.
Wonderful. So again, I'm going to drop Kesha's information in the chat. And I'll be in touch with this course and also a few others that she recommended. One from the wonderful Audrey Willard, who was also in our conversation last year, who's also a Black woman camera ambassador. And I'm so excited to really just, I guess, to process everything that you shared with us today. Because I'm like, there's just so much information and it's like levels to this that I didn't realize. So thank you so much again, Kesha, for taking the time this weekend to tell us everything about lighting. I don't know if you have any last words.
No, thank you so much for inviting me to share. It's always a pleasure chatting with you and with the group, and one of my favorite subjects. And parting note, I would say, you know, my mantra is don't be afraid to try and fail. And that includes, especially when it comes to light and pushing yourself. So thank you. And everybody keep in touch.
So much, Kesha, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And again, I'll be in touch with these resources. That way you don't feel lost. Don't worry if you didn't write everything down. It's okay. I will be in touch with these resources. And thank you again to ProPhoto for helping make this possible.
Yes, thank you, ProPhoto.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.